Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast,
where we explore natural, homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Parenting Coach, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my 3 wildlings and the Papa Bear in our fixer-upper on the beach. This is episode 65, and today I'm here with Katy Bowman talking about the role of movement in growing wild. Best-selling author, speaker, and a leader in the movement, biomechanist, Katy Bowman is changing the way we move and think about our need for movement through her company, Nutritious Movement, which is based right here in Washington State, where she lives with her family. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. The Bucket System course has just been updated with all new Google Doc worksheets to make using the system even easier. For those of you who don't know, the Bucket System is my most popular course. It uses a collaborative and sensory approach to home care, self-care, and homeschooling. Sadie Catania just posted a review saying, "The Bucket System is simplicity, novelty, and respectful parenting genius." Rachel combined these ideas in such a succinct way that made it easy to digest, complete, and take action. I love everything about it. Thank you, Sadie, for posting that review. And with the new Google Doc worksheets, now is a great time for all of you listening to jump into the Bucket System at sagefamily.com/bucket-system. Our adventure this week was that we drove a couple hours away with our friends to a wind and solar farm for a renewable energy tour from our power company, and it was awesome. We learned all about clean technology and even got to go inside the turbine. So cool. The timing was perfect as we were in a record-smashing, climate change-induced heat wave, and the knowledge really helped us all feel a little more hopeful and empowered. Oh, how we missed these hack school adventures during the pandemic. We're all so happy to be getting back out into the community adventuring again. My little obsession right now is my packed loungewear. So those of you who follow along on Instagram may have seen how I've been posting little bits and pieces of things that I have been adding as I'm refreshing my minimalist wardrobe. And one of the things that you all insisted I needed to try was packed loungewear. And you were so right. So I got 2 of the breezy cotton nighty dresses and 2 of the breezy cotton sleep sets, and OMG, they are my favorite of everything ever. It feels like I'm naked, but better. I've never had that feeling in clothing before. Plus, it's organic and sustainable to an extent that makes me wish they made everything. I basically live in these now. They are delicious. I'll link to them in the show notes, but you can find them at sagefamily.com/packed. That's PACT. If you want to see photos and videos of our day at the wind farm or my loungewear, sounds a little creepy, but I mean it in a non-creepy way, then head on over to sage.family on Instagram and follow along. People who know me and my work well have been recommending you to me forever, and I believe you are, in fact, the most requested guest for this podcast. So when I saw that you had a new book coming out, I knew this was the perfect time for us to share a conversation. Grow Wild, the Whole Child, Whole Family, Nature-Rich Guide to Moving More, written through your lens as a biomechanist, is an inspiring and accessible invitation to live a family lifestyle in alignment with what our bodies need to thrive: natural movement. So thank you for your work. Thank you for writing this wonderful book. And thank you for sharing this conversation with me today, Katie.
Oh, well, thank you for such a lovely intro. And thanks to all of your listeners or followers who suggested me as a guest. That's nice too.
Will you introduce yourself and share a bit about who you are and what you're passionate about?
Well, my name is Katy Bowman, as you already said. I'm a biomechanist, which is just a particular field of study that looks at how mechanical laws, physical laws, affect living systems. So the mechanics is the physics of it, and the bio is the living part. So I specialize in humans, the forces that humans create and experience. And so that's really, it's not all movement, but movement is certainly key. And so my interest is in how movement works on the body. So I think if I were a biochemist or a nutritionist or a dietitian, it would be clear like, oh, that's someone who looks at how what you put into your body diet wise affects your physical experience, your health, your performance, any of those things. So it's the same, only instead of food that we're putting into our body, it's the movement that we're putting into our body. So I look at what is your movement diet? How does that relate to the physical experience? And I would say it's much larger than fitness because fitness is really about certain variables. It would go to things like health and disease and certain areas in the body, so not just the whole body well-being, but this idea that every single individual part of your body needs a specific type of movement. And that's what my work is studying that for myself, making advances in my own science, but also helping other individuals don't who helping individuals learn that and well enough for their own bodies so that they can make modifications to their environment, make modifications to the way that they move, like how much they move or the modes of movement that they're selecting, or even more specifically, the form in which they are using their body when they do certain activities so that the movement that they're doing nourishes their whole body and then eventually their whole life more.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, I am going to dive right in here with these questions because I loved your book so much. I had so many questions for you. It's a good sign. Okay, so let's start with stacking. I often conceptualize the meeting of needs as a Venn diagram, one circle being your child's needs, one circle being your needs, and then invite people to creatively live in the overlap. So your concept of stacking complements that beautifully. Can you explain your approach to fulfilling multiple needs at the same time and perhaps share an example from your family life?
Well, so stacking is this idea that we all have categories of need that we're obligated to meet because of our nature. Really, we have to eat, we have to sleep, we have to move, we have to be engaged in relationships, and it's like these are needs and we all meet them every day, and we meet them through selecting tasks, ways like I have to go to work because I have to meet my need to make a living. I have to go to school because I have to meet my need to be educated, or acquiring knowledge would be a different way of saying it. I have to eat today. I have to sleep today. So, but we pick individual tasks like I'll take a nap, or I will go to the grocery store because I have to get the ingredients to make this food. I will go to the gym, or I'll go for a jog. And we tend to culturally, I would say, meet our needs one at a time. We I think I'm a biomechanist and I really think in terms of space and containers. Like it's like the way that we physically orient ourselves in space and in time is just the way that I see the world. And so when we approach our to-do list, we're usually getting our needs met in isolation. Maybe not, we're not always by ourselves, but meaning we've isolated the need, and we as a culture really create places that say like this is where the need is met. So the gym, for example, would be a place where movement happens. But you can also move in a lot of places that aren't places just for movement, places where you pay, or places where you go only for 60 minutes and they happen on a schedule, movement can really happen anywhere. So if you, decided to walk to the grocery store, that would be a task, picking a different task that would not only get your food needs met because maybe you had an errand to go to the grocery store, but you could also take a walk to get there. And if you um, brought a friend with you or a partner with you or a child with you, then that one 45-minute or 75-minute period of time is now meeting your food need, meeting your friend and relationship or family need, it's meeting your movement needs all at the same time. So instead of having three separate 45-minute tasks that had you, shooting from place to place, you've just picked a task where many things are being met. And, when you're adding other people, then now your same period of time is meeting other people's needs too. And I think in such a crazed time in which we live in where we're sort of we're always short on time. Like if you made a list of the things that you wanted to get done for your benefit, I think time is the variable that we don't really know how to manipulate it because it seems so fixed, and it is
Mhm.
fixed in a sense. But I think in the other way, I think that really the issue is more in the malleable parts, the way that we have come to separate everything out from how it would occur in a more natural state. So stacking is really based on permaculture. It is specifically calling back or hearkening back to the idea that nature, when things arise from nature, nature is so efficient in the way that it meets needs. The more we pull things out of their original context, the more time is going to be lost in between getting the things out, those essentials that we wanted. So we've really lost time because of the way that we execute our daily lives.
Yes, I could not agree more. I'm often talking about this in terms of how, particularly women, but all people really silo the different parts of their identities. And I'm often sort of coming at the same concept from that angle of like integrating the various parts of your identity. And that allows you to meet more than one need at the same time. Like you said, like walking to the grocery store with your kids, you're getting nature, you're getting movement, you're getting connection with your kids, you're getting the grocery shopping done. Like how can we integrate those different parts of you so that you can meet multiple needs at the same time? So I love the like perspective that you bring to it, and the language of stacking I found really helpful.
I'm glad.
Okay, let's talk about culture, because the culture piece is probably the one I find myself doing the most active work to change as a parent who advocates for her children's needs out in the world. There's this quote in your book that I love: when the only problem with someone moving in a space is our perception that movement doesn't belong there, is it possible to change our feelings about being bothered? And oh, I love that quote. So talk to us about how culture impacts movement.
Well, as you know, I organized the book by container. So that is a space in which you spend your time. Your shoes are a container for your feet, and your clothes are a container, and your time spent in your educational mode or your work mode, that's a container. Your home's a container. But I made culture a container, and more than that, I made it the first container because it's the largest one. Meaning, you're going to wake up in your culture every day. So you don't wake up in your shoes every day. There's at least a period of time in which you've taken off that this cast, this thing with barriers around there that are physically keeping your toes from spreading away from each other or feeling the ground. So our culture is the largest container that we are navigating when it comes to movement, and it's a sedentary culture on top of that. So there's many things that our culture is, but one of them, a defining characteristic of this culture, is sedentarism, meaning we regularly build infrastructures and rules that keep people, children too, I mean, children are people too, but everyone, from moving abundantly. It's sort of what's required in order for this society to keep going as it's going. And so, yeah, and it's a little bit harder because culture is so invisible. It's not like shoes. Like shoes, I can see that they're pushing my toes together, but I might not see that my discomfort, if I walk into a space with my child, that my discomfort at having anyone else perceive my child is unruly is enough for me to then lay on rules to them and expectations that they don't move. And the pressure is coming from my feelings, which are coming from other people's feelings. But these are still, they're intangible, but they're still perhaps the greatest barrier to movement that needs to be um, we need to be able to move beyond or move over or under or around or
Yeah.
maybe all three. And then there's the other cultural elements too, right? Like there's the expectations, but then there's just the straight up fact that we're a sitting culture. So the the ubiquitousness of chairs everywhere, like that's a cultural phenomenon. That's not a human phenomenon. That is something that you don't see everywhere in humans all over the planet. It's unique to us. And this fact that we dress in particular ways, that our shoes look a particular way, like all of the subcultures of clothing and home and education are also contained within culture. So I too use Venn diagrams quite a bit, only these diagrams are, they're more circles inside circles inside circles, so that you can see that you're never really stepping outside of the culture just because you're stepping inside school. You're in school in your culture. And so I think that the book Grow Wild, while offering lots of practical, tips and information about how movement works and why it's essential, my greatest intent was to open a reader's eyes to seeing the sedentary aspects of a culture maybe for the first time. And I have these bias check-ins in every chapter that have a list of questions, because I don't even think that we realize we're participating as much in perpetuating sedentarism as we do, until we take ourselves through looking at it closely and then seeing how it relates to our own bodies, and then of course to the bodies of the children that are in our lives.
Yes, I have this example just came to mind while you were talking. One time when my youngest was maybe 3, we were sitting in sort of a casual restaurant. I was in a booth, and my 3-year-old was standing up, sitting down, standing up, sitting down, standing up, kind of leaning over the back of the booth while he was eating. And there was an older woman at a table next to us, and she leaned over and said, "You need to have him sit down in the booth." And I kind of took a breath and paused, and I asked her, "What's your concern?" And she said, "The corners of the table are sharp." And so I turned and I looked at my son and I said, "She is feeling worried that you are going to hurt yourself on the corner of this table. Did you notice that the corner of the table is here?" And he kind of felt the corner of the table and he was like, "Yeah, I'm okay. I'm over on this side." And he kind of moved a little bit away from the corner. And then I just sort of smiled at her, and then we went back to our meal. But there are like sort of, 1,000 different ways that I engage in those conversations with people throughout my life with my kids, because there are so often times where the natural movement needs of my kids are bumping up against sort of these cultural norms and expectations that we have about, like you said, about like sitting, that we will sit still and in a chair for the duration of a meal, things like that.
Well, and that's a good example of, I think that changing the culture requires a lot of dialogue, uncomfortable dialogue.
Yeah.
And I think that that's maybe just the hindrance. It's just easier to tell your child to sit
down.
down or be quiet, or even me, like not what, even sometimes just me standing in a place where everyone else is sitting and I'm just doing my own thing makes other people react. They're like, "Would you like to sit down?" And it's like you're sort of worrying us, but that is a good thing. It's like, like, what's your concern? Allows someone to express, like, I feel anxious because I feel like I'm supposed to be doing. If you're seated, then I know that you don't have any needs for me, but you're standing, so I keep wanting to check in. It's like, "Oh, I'm fine standing." If we had something like my back hurts, so I have to stand, then it would be like, "Oh, okay, okay,
Right.
I understand now." So it is about conversation, I think, with people that we
Yeah.
don't know a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think questions like, "What's your concern?" Sometimes it's like, "What's your fear?" But I like, "What's your concern?" because I am honestly open to the ways in which my and my children's behavior is affecting someone else. So for example, if my child is being really loud and it's hurting your ears, I absolutely am open to that feedback and we can make adjustments. But it does, like you said, sort of force the other person to identify what is it about this that feels like it's a problem for me? Because then we can all sort of look at the issue for what it is. And probably 80% of the time, like it's just sort of a innocuous cultural expectation. Like there's not any actual need that warrants us adjusting our behavior.
Well, and this is a good lesson for everything, I think.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about clothing. I actually have a minimalist wardrobe course, and in it I have 5 pillars: climate, lifestyle, which is how we move, comfort, fit, and style. And you touched on all of those in your chapter on clothing, so I loved it. What should we look for in clothing and shoes?
Well, I think really specifically in this case, I'm speaking about clothing as a container for movement. So anything that hinders your ability to move would be something that you would have to look at to say, what do I need for my outfit right now? And if movement is not one of them, so be it. But for children, we also have to take a closer look to see, like, well, when does a child not need to be able to move? Like to take yourself further down. I think professional, people who are in an office will say, well, I have to wear this because this is the look. And so I'm not going to be moving anyway. So therefore I call them sedentary clothes, because we're really good with labeling active clothes active, but we're not as good at labeling clothes that don't move at like still clothes or sedentary
Right.
clothes. Like no one says like, I got to go put on my sit down pants. We say, I got to put on my exercise pants. Even if we need flexibility and comfort when sitting down. So like there's this really simple thing that we can do, which is to put an outfit on. And then I put movement tests in the books, especially for kids. If you're going to buy something or if kids are going to get dressed, do your arms raise overhead? Do they go out to the side? Can you bend over comfortably and touch your toes? Can you lean? Can you squat? So that would be a lot of times the yield of the clothes, but then it gets more technical because as we're looking at more robust movement, does your outfit allow you to invert comfortably for you? Are you able to climb something without things getting caught on trees? Like, so then we could have something that's completely stretchy, but flowy becomes an issue when it comes to safety for a climber. And then if we're putting on shoes, I've written multiple books on really the need for the feet to move and develop. And the need for shoes to act more like a second skin and less like an orthotic, that's really holding the foot and ankle still. So this idea of adding really flexible shoes, but then of course looking at the soles and seeing like what's the traction that's offered here? What's the slipperiness? Are they in heeled shoes? Are they in shoes that actually fit well enough for them to walk 4 or 5 miles in? Or is one of the reasons maybe a child doesn't want to go for a walk because their outfit makes walking a long time uncomfortable? We don't really tune into it. And remember, children who are growing up in a culture have so many things that don't make sense to them that everyone is just saying, no, these are fine, you just don't understand. As you get older, you'll understand. So it's very easy for someone to accept an outfit where they can't lift one leg away from the other or raise their arms overhead or move their ankles or balance, because they've been told that they don't understand their experience. And so, in some cases that can be true. And in other cases, there's a difference between being able to articulate an understanding and just going, I'm not going to walk now because my understanding is that a long bout of movement in this outfit isn't going to do me well. So I'm going to use the words that I can understand, which is I don't want to go on a walk right now. I don't want to go do that movement. So just to tune into, sometimes there's things happening that we don't understand because we too are sort of not understanding how little we move as a group of people.
Yes, I thought that I had 3 boys, and then when my oldest was around 12, she transitioned, and I was like kind of shocked and horrified at the clothing and shoes movement issue that when this child was shopping from the boys section, it was mostly like sweatpants or sweatshorts and t-shirts, and then switching over to the girls section, so much of the clothing did not allow for any type of natural movement. So like we were mostly barefoot or barefoot shoes. And then going over into the girls section, so many of the shoes did not allow for any sort of natural movement. So I found even just sort of switching aisles, switching tabs when clothing shopping made the job a whole lot harder when I was looking in the girls section.
And both, I have one child that's a boy and one child that's a girl, and both of them will come to me and they'll be like, am I going to be able to wear this today to do this? And I was like, well, what are the movements that it involves? And then, they'll show me and I'm like, well, how does it feel? And then they'll say, yeah, it's going to be too bunched down my leg. I'm going to go change. And so I think I really think in terms of geometry with everything and explaining everything in terms of geometry and just keeping it back to what do you want to do with those clothes physically versus I think a lot of people for clothing, they can focus on the idea of expression, art, adornment, which I talk about in the book because I definitely have an adorner. But I would say that the need for movement, if we're going to have a hierarchy of needs, eating and movement are going to come above other things like embellishment. And so we just want to make sure that we understand how to get both, right? That's another Venn diagram of yours, which would be like, I need to move and I also need to, express myself. And so just to keep tuning in with the check, it's like, are you like how it looks? You're feeling good? All right. Now, how do you feel when you do this? Not good? All right. Well, what modification can you make? And then it really teaches them, I think, to see their own body as something that is not only a visual presentation, but is something that's dynamic and can express other elements of themselves once they're moving.
Yes. Okay. You mentioned food, and you brought a fresh biomechanical perspective to the breastfeeding and food conversation in your book. That is so valuable. What changes can we make to how we eat that can staff the meeting of more needs?
Well, again, I think it is food is really high on the hierarchy of human needs. It drives our biology. And so movement is how you get food. Like that's in our DNA. That's why we move. It's why we eat. It's extremely primal. But now what we've done is we've cultivated a society where many people are able to eat a tremendous amount of food without doing any of the movement for it, right? So there's a change in the relationship between food and movement. Now, all food takes a tremendous amount of all food takes a tremendous amount of movement to become food, and a tremendous amount of movement and knowledge to become food that is edible for consumption. We're just not the ones that are doing that volume of work anymore. And so what happens is there's a perception then that food is easy to come by, that we focused so much in this culture on eating nutritiously, that we've really lost handing our children down any knowledge of how food becomes and what movements are required for food. It is still the most important thing to humanity, but yet it's not in our cultural hand down knowledge because a sedentary culture outsources most of its movement to another culture. And so because food is such a ubiquitous need, an abundant need is probably a better way to say it. Like we all have an abundant need for food that's not changing. And we all have an equally matching need for movement. And then I would argue for nature and for knowledge of how food is an element of nature. We just don't talk about it like that. We think of nature as something that doesn't really exist anymore, but is good to get a good dose of, but we don't really understand it. Yeah, you visit it and you need, 20 minutes a day, 3 times a week. Like we don't understand, the knowledge of the nature is what humans need to keep going on as humans. Like that is still there, but we're able to not look directly on that right now in this particular moment in time. So since food and movement are such abundant needs, it makes sense then for parents who are really struggling to be like, I don't know how to get my child moving more, to layer or stack food and movement. So, which is I call that snacktivities. Like as I write it, like you got to get snacktive because like what you're doing is you're not trying to create a whole thing yourself to inspire or get kids moving. They're already naturally tuned into food, and if you start young enough, they're naturally wired to explore movement and food at the same time. That's what childhood is for. That's what the DNA, like that's what our childhood is for in our DNA. Like that's why we pick up things, we touch things, we sort things, we want to get it, we want to be doing what everyone else is doing around us. So on the most simple level, we talked about walking to the grocery store. I mean, what is that? We talked about it being nature time, relationship time, food time, movement time, but you're also handing down the knowledge that walking for your food is a thing. It's been a thing for every other human before you, but for us, it's not a thing anymore. But there's many people who still have to walk for the food, and many of the people who have to walk for the food are the ones making our food. So the idea of like walking for your food is a thing. Like that's what it takes to get food. And then having a pot, like planting some seedlings in your kitchen or your garden, digging things and planting them. Like these are small, fine motor movements, but they're still within the category of movement. Many people need therapy when they don't get enough of them, right? So we do understand the essentialness of them. But you're layering now not only food and movement, but again, the knowledge of this is where food comes from. This is the process by which humans get food. Where do you think this meal came from? What movements do you think they were doing? Who was doing it? Where did it come? Like you're starting to pass down a more accurate, a more accurate. I want to say accurate, a more complete version of what food is, or healthy eating, beyond just you personally getting the range of nutrients, like making sure you eat healthy snacks. It's like, well, I add mechanical nutrients, right? So like one big element of Grow Wild is to talk about mechanical nutrients are also a thing. So when you eat food that's void of its mechanical nutrients, you're not really getting all you could out of a particular food. So the idea of buying pre-shredded carrots versus whole carrots and shredding them yourself, right? You begin to see the movement of like what it took to become the thing that you would like to eat or are going to eat. So that's why Snacktivities is in there, because if you're looking for a way to move more, food is such an excellent portal into getting you and your family or children in your care moving more excitedly, moving more and doing it excitedly, but also really opening their eyes and that education and knowledge that they're being given about like, oh, this is what I need as a human. I need to understand these concepts. Like we would take reading or other education and saying that they're essential, but where food and how food comes to humans is more essential than those other things, like just biologically.
Yes, yes. Like a tiny example for us is a while back, we bought a cheese grater. Like for whatever reason, somehow we had fallen into the habit of buying cheese like pre-grated. And I was telling my kid this story about how my mom used to always grate the cheese, and I would like eat the cheese as fast as she grated it. And it was this like fun memory of mine. Every time we made this meal, these tacos, she would be grating cheese and I would be eating it. And my kid was like, we should do that. And I was like, we should. Like the cheese tasted so much better than this cheese. And we went out and we bought a cheese grater, and now like we're all grating the cheese. And it's like this new movement, this whole new like motion that my kids had never been exposed to, something that I had never even thought about before. So like I think it can be helpful to just look even for like those small opportunities to bring a little bit more movement into the story.
And hey, we all use convenience
Yeah.
and benefit from it. But I think that there's a difference between using it and using it blindly, or like with not being aware or mindful of what's being replaced here and what's the cost, of doing it in this way, so that you can choose, you can choose
Yeah.
when you do it. And And I think that there's a difference between even your kids saying that I have a choice between these two scenarios, because they're only going to be presented with more and more convenient, less and less movement, more and more technological, done in, in an industrial manner away from them. They're only going to, that world's going to only continue to increase. So for them to have the knowledge of, oh, like maybe I can delve into this over here, but I can take back some of my movement here. And like, as you said, you're bridging a gap between your childhood and and theirs. It's memories of you with your family. And this is really, I think, what cultural preservation is we tend to do it for holidays a lot, I would say. Like, that's the one time we would roll out, like, oh, we always make this by hand, but it's like everything is to be made by hand. And so by bringing that into every day, you're really honoring each day, you're honoring those memories. And so, I mean, for us, we've definitely used it as a way of teaching our children their heritage in this way, their own rituals, and we modify them or create new ones, of course, but it's just a way of creating a through line, I would say, back to the generations that came before you.
Yes, we have like we try to grow food, and we have this peach tree. It's like my kids joke that I'm like it's my fourth baby. Like, I love this peach tree. We planted it when it was a baby. Every summer we eat peach cobbler. It's sort of in this far corner of our property. And this year, my peach tree got this curled leaf disease. And so we'd been like researching, trying to figure out what to do and what happens. And so we were talking about how it's not going to yield as many peaches. And so we're going to have to buy some peaches from somewhere else if we still want to be able to make this peach cobbler that we make. And so my kids started asking all these questions about like, okay, yeah. So somebody else has this knowledge about preventing this, like, because we didn't know about it, So these orchards, like in the Pacific Northwest, like since it's such a moist, wet place, this can be a real problem. So they like have this knowledge that had been passed down to them and shared among the growers. And like, so someone else is going to go out and make the walk to their peach tree. And I bet their peach trees are much taller than ours, right? Like, how do they reach the peach trees in the top? So just like, so we started like reaching out to orchards and trying to find a place we could go visit, but engaging in those conversations, even, I love that you mentioned that, just like having those conversations when your kids ask those questions. And then in the book, you talk a lot about like bringing eating outside. So I love that too, like cooking outside, eating outside, that like opens up so much more movement than happens around like a table with 4 chairs.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about home. You invite families to have less furniture in their homes and more opportunities to monkey around. Can you give us some recommendations for making our homes more movement friendly?
Well, first, this starts on the cultural level, which is what are your movement rules of your house? And I would encourage you to also ask your children or children in your care what they think the movement rules of the house are, because chances are that they are perceiving rules through maybe even non-explicit words that you say, that they just know that you're more comfortable if they're not moving. So like involve them in that conversation and figure out what the movement rules of the house are, and then ask yourself, just so you would ask the stranger, who's asking if the child sits down. It's like, why are these rules here for me? What are my concerns? What are my concerns is a good thing to probably ask yourself a lot when you're evaluating your movement space. And then you can articulate them. It's like, okay, maybe there's too many corners for me. I don't want them running through the house because I'm afraid they're going to slip and fall. Okay, so what do you need to do? Pick up rugs? Do you need to get rid of the coffee table? If you have a toddler, so that they have access to a lot more movement without banging their head on a corner. Like, what are you tethered to in your house? Why is it there? Why is it necessary? Can something else do that would allow you to get what you need, decorative or like functional furniture wise, while also not encroaching on yourself and your family's need to move more, especially if they're being, kept in the house more often, or if you don't go to other places, very often. Take them to where movement is, in your sense, permissible. Like if you're not taking them there, they don't have access to go there, and you understand that they have an abundant need for movement, then where they are the most needs to look like a place where they can get those movements that they need. So it's changing the rules. And then, like I said, it's also making more space, literal space. So pushing things to the side. I'm not a super big fan of designating one room for movement because
Agreed.
you know what I mean? We're going
Yeah.
back to that concept of like, well, if the gym is a place for movement, it's outside of my house. Like it perpetuates the idea that movement isn't for daily life. It's not for
Yeah.
every minute of the day. Like this is my sedentary time in my sedentary clothes, and that's my movement time and my movement clothes. I think that there's definitely something in the way that we have movement in our mind that's keeping us continuing on an ever declining path to more, I don't want to say more, less movement, more sedentarism. So
Yeah.
so space, and then of course I highlight it's not only just movement that we need. There's particular movements that we need, and so when kids are, pre-12, certainly. I mean, I think all adults need it, but if you're really setting your body, you're setting your structure in your youth, and that structure is what you take into your adulthood. That's why movement is so important. It's because there are shapes that are brought about, even in your brain, that you can't get once you're past this malleable supercomputer gathering and experiencing movement phase. Like nature gives it to you at this period of time, and you are always using it. And if you use it with a lot more sedentarism, then your shape going forward is more set up for sedentarism than it is for movement. So like bone density is like the example that I use the most often. It's like you're going to hit a peak bone density in your juvenile period. And even if you discover that you love movement later on and are going to become, a great mover and do all sorts of weight bearing exercise, the way bone works is you're not going to ever get more than what you peaked out as in childhood. So that's why it's so important. This time is made for movement for kids. So we had monkey bars in our house. You can do simple chin up bar, some place for children to get some of the shoulder movement that they need. Like they might be able to roll around on the floor, which is great, and jump off stuff, also great. But thinking about it mechanically speaking, it's like, okay, well, the arms need to brachiate. That's a motion that they do. They need to be able to, you need to be able to hang from the weight of your arms and move from monkey bar to monkey bar. And you want to have at least some small space in your house, or maybe just outside your house, like in your yard, where they could get that, movement nutrient, so to speak.
Yeah, I love to look to kids for the type of movement that they're craving and then kind of make small adjustments in the environment to allow for that. So, like as parents, we don't have to know the full encyclopedia of all potential movement that our kid might be interested in. But even if you just watch like your toddler, like if they're trying to climb the bookshelf, okay, maybe move the bookshelf and put like one of those little wall ladders there and a tumbling mat at the bottom of it. Or if your kid is constantly jumping off the sofa and there's a coffee table there, move the coffee table to a different location and encourage them to jump off the sofa over and over and over and over and over again. Maybe put a rug there. So you can, even if you don't have this, all of the knowledge of how bodies should or would want to move, like Katy does, even if you can just watch your kids and like notice how their bodies are, what kind of movement their bodies are craving, and then make some small shifts in the environment to support that type of movement.
Well, and I think of movement's like a diet. So there's like I think of there's certain categories of movement that we all need to the best of our abilities. And so I created an activity tracker so that you could also, it goes with the book. I can give you a link to it for the show notes if you want. And you can look to see which categories you're meeting and which you aren't. Because I definitely have a jumper and a climber. And they can both jump and climb, but there's one who's definitely, and it's really our anthropometric dimensions, the shape of our body lends us to certain gifts and interests, strengths, with just what we're able to do. So once you realize sort of what your kid needs a lot of through their own inclination, set up spaces for them to be able to do that. But also, just like food, if you have a kid that loves a particular food, that's great. But one food does not make up a nutritious diet, right? So you have to
Mhm.
think about, okay, well, what are some other things that I should be thinking about, and then choose those tasks to stack so that you're getting more not only more whole movement, but maybe some certain particular movements that maybe you found both of your kids or other people in your family, or if you have a classroom that you thought everyone in the classroom could benefit from, and make that a thing, make that a feature. That would be another way of stacking.
Yeah, I love how you say movement is like food. And, quote, just as dietitians encourage families to eat the rainbow, kids need to move the rainbow.
Right, right.
I love that. And I factor that into like our adventure planning too, though I've never really used the language of like a rainbow movement diet before to describe it. So I love that. But like if we're hiking in the mountains as a family one day, we might kayak next time, and we might bike ride with friends the time after that. So even looking at it in like the microcosm of trip planning, we might book one activity on a boat and one in the water and one in the treetops. So we're kind of like intuitively, if maybe not even consciously, moving the rainbow. Just I hadn't even realized that I had been doing that until reading your book, and then thinking like, oh yeah, like now I have this language to understand what we've sort of already intuitively been doing in this new way and why it's so beneficial.
Well, and I think we're just not as comfortable with movement. I mean, we can think about this keeps kids from being bored, like, or or too tired in one particular way. So maybe we are thinking about it a little bit physically. But yes, it's just that sense that mixing things up is good.
Yeah.
Just in general, like it usually works out that way, where mixing up things is good. Mixing up things is beneficial.
Yeah. Okay, now I get to share what might be my favorite quote from your book. Just as we view nature as a much smaller environment, green spaces, than it actually is, everything, we've boxed learning into the much, much smaller container of education. We've gone from learning is everywhere to a more formal, systematic, industrial approach to learning, and we've put it inside a greenhouse. Ah, I love that quote. And yet, your book is written with the assumption of school. Most of the people who are listening to this podcast are like homeschoolers, unschoolers, sort of natural learners. So I'm curious what your educational path or the environment that you've chosen with or for your children is, and how you came to that decision.
Well, I mean, I think that school as a container doesn't mean a school building. It just means the seated time for when you are doing your lessons, even whether that's in a school building or at home. To me, school really is just this period of time where we're doing some sort of organized learning. So my kids both went to nature school, um, starting at preschool, and so from 3 to maybe 8, they did a nature school, preschool, kindergarten, and then what would I guess count as early early education. I don't have like, I'm not an educator in that way, so I don't know
Yeah.
what all the language is. But yeah, we definitely went with the, is it an unschool model? Because I
Mhm.
think that the nature schools, as I say in the book, they come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Some nature schools are simply the same, I would say, type of academic learning, but done in an outside environment.
Right.
And some are nature schools that are set up to instruct science outdoors, like nature learning. And then some are more about child led, like being outside and having some sort of structure of, maybe because of the temperature of the day or because of what's happening in the surrounding area, that becomes, I'm going to say, a lesson with air quotes,
Yeah.
but it becomes sort of the focus of the learning. But it's very fluid, and there is no sort of language used around, like, now we're going to do this, and now we're going to learn this, and now it's time for that, where things are really parsed into sections. So that's what they got to do for really their first 0 to 8. And I think that, I mean, I was definitely a privilege to be able to do that, to even have a nature school where we are, that we had access to. And the school system that they were in really focused on what I would say and what I call in the book nature learning, where like there's a difference, I would say, between learning all the names of everything and before like learning the features of everything, learning the experience of other things. So they have quite a robust uh, nature awareness and comfort and understanding. They know all the trees and what they do. They know all the plants and what's edible and what's not. They can build all the fires. It'd be more like we would call wilderness skills almost, with the exception of, I think, so they have the comfort of being there, but they also just came to have, I mean, natural knowledge that neither my husband and I have. I went to college for a very long time, and I still don't know all the trees in my own yard
Yeah.
because, I wanted, and I want them to be able to have, access to both. But again, because of my understanding of really the importance of knowing about being comfortable in what we'll call the natural world or nature, that was sort of our priority. But the concepts, like the concepts of what we would say are taught in more traditional academic settings, they come in anyway.
Yeah.
They come in anyway, but they come in at an opportune time. Like they strategically show up. And I mean, I still remember when my son brought they had made arrows in school, and he's got his giant knife, his 3-inch knife, and he's 5, and he has, whittled the whole thing down. But, you just have a conversation. What are you doing? He's like, well, see the bumps on here? Like I have to smooth them off so that it can't fly straight, because when the wind pushes up against it, then the wind pushing up against the stick ends up moving the stick and it wobbles and it's not going to be accurate, which is much more of I would say, a traditional knowledge base. It doesn't have the it's not called aerodynamics.
Right.
We're not going to use physics equations, but at 5, he can understand the way the wind blowing over something also affects the thing. And that's the important part of it, when you live in a way where the accuracy of your arrow is a life or death situation for you, right? So for humans, that understanding was what got humans to this point in the first place. So again, it's sort of that same thing. It's sort of an homage or understanding of human knowledge that's come up from the humans before us is really being rapidly lost and replaced with a different set of knowledge. But we still depend on that knowledge before. We still need people to understand it and educate it. So there's like a preservation, so to speak. I mean, movement. I teach movement. Movement is not required in this society anymore, right? Like you don't need to move your body for anything. So why would we keep harping on people that they need it when it is so clearly obsolete? I can get into my car and take me anywhere. Well, the reason we want to preserve it is because it turns out, well, we don't need it for this society. We need it for our bodies. Like our bodies still depend on it. So it not being required is sort of arguable. And I would say that
unmet need pops up in other ways.
It does. And we meet it some ways and needs it. We meet it in ways that maybe doesn't tie together in our minds.
Right.
This is a symptom of not moving. It's a symptom of movement starvation, but we don't use that language around movement. We use it with food because we're definitely an eating culture, but we don't really recognize signs of movement starvation in the sedentary culture because it's simply not in our frame of reference.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet it's connected to so many things that our society quickly labels, diagnoses and medicates and whatever, and recommends changes in diet, like you said, and other things. Like I have some digestive challenges, and movement is like one of the core components that keeps me healthy. Like if I move, my digestive system functions so much better. And that was never like suggested or mentioned. I didn't read about it in any of the literature about my condition. So yeah, like you said, it's just sort of this foundational thing that was like based on the human model the human technology. Like it's supposed to come like factory installed, that knowledge, and we've just kind of lost it. And then the other programs that are trying to run, it's like, we can't run, something's missing.
Well, a sedentary culture, your digestive system is so dependent on movement. The idea that we would have a digestive system that sits inside a vessel that doesn't move all day long would only stand out if you were someone who had seen digestive systems of a really dynamic group. You know what I mean? It's just a dynamic system in a chair for 12 hours a day is just a digestive system to a sedentary culture. You would have to be an active culture to even recognize what a sedentary digestive system looks like. And so that's my book I wrote a few years ago, Move Your DNA, is all about that, using the captive orcas that are swimming in tanks. They have folded fins.
Yep.
Because of how they're swimming, which is in a circle, which is not what their anatomy would use to be upright. A circular swimming folds the fin over, and straight swimming creates the forces that can maintain it. But if every whale that you've ever seen is inside a tank, you yourself were an orca in the tank with a folded fin, it wouldn't stand out as odd. It would just be it's just a digestive system. It's not one that sits all day. It's just a digestive system.
Oh, we can't even see it. Okay, let's talk about alloparents. Can you explain what that word means? And do you have any tips for how we can create the communities we need?
Well, alloparents is a word from anthropological and biological jargon's not the right word. So I'll say that again. So alloparent is a word that's used to describe humans, but also other animals that tend to the juveniles, the young, the children of others. It's not their own child, but they provide parent-like care. So again, when we go back to how there's a tremendous amount of work it takes to be a human. And when you're all dependent on that level of constant physical labor, really, when you have an offspring, your ability to work diminishes. And so the way societies can move forward is when that work is shared over a larger group of people than just parents, because there are plenty of people and animals that don't have offspring, and that's great because that's how it works well, is when you have those without offspring supporting, or those who have had offspring before but no longer have any young animals, human or otherwise, to care for. You lend that caring to, it helps the parents, but I think more importantly, it helps the child. The child is used to having parental-like care, because a trademark of alloparental care is it doesn't feel different to the child.
Yeah.
So that's different than going to some place where it feels tremendously different than being parented. So I think that is if you're looking at the science of it, like that is a characteristic of it. So with movement, I mean, again, this book is, I think alloparental care stretches, the benefits go much farther beyond movement. But what I was speaking about in movement specifically was, and it's sort of kind of like back to what you were talking about before, when we as individuals require sedentarism out of each other, we're also requiring it out of children. We're all alloparents. We're all alloparents in the sense of, or we're all providing influence, if not care. We are creating spaces that are affecting how other people move. And even if you're not directly involved in, I would say, children-related areas, children are passing through our space. Or if they're not passing through our space, that should be a question too. It's like, why aren't kids here? Like, why, if we're talking about society, it wasn't
We have
so
decided that
sectioned.
children can only exist in schools and like older people can only exist in retirement communities. We've siloed them away.
Yeah, I mean, it's really like schools or playgrounds. Like we really just say like that's over there. But what happens is unless you can be over there in your space a lot, you have to spend a lot of time in a space that's not for you.
Yeah.
So that is a new emerging phenomenon for humans. Like that's not what got us here.
No.
To this point. And so yeah, the tips are to simply, read Grow Wild. Like that was why I wrote it because I think that it's like, I had no idea, like even I did a couple great interviews with different physicians. Like I have a waiting room, but I never really thought about, they're coming to me, these kids, and I'm like, you need to start moving more. But yet in my space where they come to see the person who's going to tell them they need to move more, they have to be quiet and they have to sit down. Right. And so they're like, I'm going to actually create, in one of the pictures in Grow Wild, it showed how a school took an existing hallway and then put balance beam stickers and hop here stickers, so that people just moving through a space that they were already moving through would be enticed, encouraged, given explicit permission to move. And so she's like, I'm going to create that same thing in my office. And then part of it is like communication, I think, is key. So maybe you send an email out to your clients and saying, this is why I'm doing this and why. So you might notice that my office becomes a little bit more dynamic over here, but I've also created a quiet space and I've marked them so that, like maybe if you feel like, especially if you're coming because you don't feel good, that you want something over here, like, you just have to think about how it will play out for all involved, and communicate, I think is the tip. And I think that that's part of the societal change. And then if changing society feels too stressful, then the changes are just in yourself, getting alloparents. And so this physician is an alloparent, right? This physician is offering maybe something that even you as a parent were struggling to figure out how to do. And now this office becomes sort of a model for schools and other offices and home life. So I think that that's instructional through modeling. And then all of us, like, find your community. Like that is my suggestion. And it can be people without children. It could be who just love them. And it could be people who have children that you want to move together as a pack. It could be bringing in elders to show all of the movement that they are really gifted at, that aren't making their way down. I mean, there used to be so many multiple generational interactions, and they're just not happening anymore. And I think that society is at a loss when that happens.
Yes. I was thinking of this conversation coming up this weekend when I was at a sailing regatta with my kids. And at one point I was on the dock with some kids who had come in early, and the people running the regatta had asked, like, who does this child belong to? And my kid said, my mom's over there, I belong to her. And then his friend's mom, who wasn't there, she had other children that she was off tending. My son's friend looked at me and looked at the guy and said, I belong to her too. And immediately in my mind, I thought, Aloe parent.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
There it is. Like that concept, like he knows he belongs to more than just his mother. Like there is a circle of people around him with whom he is safe, and just that he belongs. So
with whom he belongs. I mean, it's that simple. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, the show notes can be found at sagefamily.com/podcast65, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. So what, Katy, are your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into this topic? And of course, we're going to link to the Grow Wild book, and I recommend that everybody go out and get yourself a copy and read it.
Sorry, the question is, what other resources?
Yes, and they can be yours or they can be other people's. Where can people find you? Things that...
Just where to go next. I'm nutritiousmovement.com and Nutritious Movement on social media. And I try to share quite a bit of, I would say, examples from everyday life. So, we talked a lot about concepts, But I think many parents will be like, yeah, but how and where exactly? And so, the book is full of them, but so are what I share. So you can pick stuff up there. And then I have a podcast and a whole library of books that get into movement, in slightly different directions. That's all available on the website. And then resources, like other, not my resources. I mean, I can point to some of the books that I included in Grow Wild that I thought would be helpful for parents. So there's a great series of forest school adventure books. So if you are someone who doesn't feel comfortable being outside, and I think books are a great way to find a little bit of instruction. And I feel like that series of forest school, and it's also urban forest school. So if you live in a place that you don't perceive as forested, it's really more about nature skills. Those are really great resources for ideas of those activities that we were talking about.
Yeah.
And I think really some of your great resources are people around you who are maybe a little bit older, and say like just interviews. Like you can even have your kids interview, like, what did you used to do as a kid? I mean, so this resource is not in the way we're used to thinking about resources, like online or someone else. Like, we can ask the people around us, how did you move as a kid? What were your chores? What foods did you like to make? How far did you used to walk? And then, say like, we have a neighbor, and he's 80. And he said he used to walk into town to get ice cream when he was 12. And it was an 18-mile round trip walk. And that's what all his friends did to get ice cream, because of course there was no other option. And it was a gift to them to be able to get to go walk into town and do ice cream instead of their chores. And so once we had that knowledge, we're like, let's go do the Tom walk. Let's go see if we could do that too. So like, what are we guided by? What is the resource here? It's an actual person that we know, and we got the old trail, that came down and to do it, and it doesn't look the same anymore that it did 65 years ago, but we could do it. And that became a whole day thing. It became an event. And who are we celebrating? We're celebrating him and his memories. We could talk to him about it. So it's just that sort of thing of using the humans around you as a resource is a good way to get connection, versus only thinking of resources as something digital or outside of where you are right now and with who you are right now. And I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but that's just an idea.
That is so beautiful. It was not what I expected, but completely expanded my mind in the most wonderful ways. So thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for this whole conversation. It's been amazing. I think you're incredible. I'm going to keep supporting your work every chance I get, and everybody else should too. Thank you, Katy.
Oh, thank you so much.